the News Channel 5 network, this is MorningLine with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Barris here on a Thursday. Good show on tap for you. We've been planning on doing something along these lines ever since we've seen all these developments recently in Iran and Iraq. And I thought today would be a good day for this, especially in the wake of the president addressing the country yesterday and where we stand right now with all of that. Many of you following it closely, and certainly a lot of people around the world are as well. With us this morning to talk about it, we're going to open up the phone lines, get your opinion as well. Is Marc Schwerdt with us from Lipscomb? Good morning to you, sir. A regular guest on this program.
Thank you.
It's so interesting the way this develops. You know, I don't spend a lot of time on certain forms of social media. Younger people do, obviously, and my son, who's in college now, and it was just so odd. Obviously, I've been following, what happened in Iran, but he called me on Friday or something and said, "Dad, are we starting World War III?" And I'm like, "No, I don't think we are, son." And he's like, well, everywhere on these emojis and tweets and Instagram, among some of the younger people in college and high school, they're all tweeting this stuff. And he was kind of freaking out, really. Yeah. He was like, is there going to be a draft? Am I going to go fight? And all of this. I go, no, it's not to that point yet. No. But it's kind of like, are you aware of some of that?
I was aware of it. I was very surprised.
So was I.
There was not something I was expecting, because the draft has been such a relic for going on 40 some odd years now that, it's a pro forma thing you kind of do, like when you turn 18. And I remember, actually signing to selective service.
Right.
But if there is a bureaucratic part of the federal government that seems to have really no purpose right now, I would think it would be selective service.
Yeah.
Because, the likelihood that we're going to start up a draft is realistically just so far out of my consideration that I was just flabbergasted that was actually an issue.
Yeah, okay. And I don't want to get too far afield, but that's what hit me there. And I thought, well, a lot of people, even these younger folks like my son, who frankly don't pay that close attention to international news and this, caught wind of it. All right, with regard to what's been going on here, one of the first questions I asked the professor when I sat down is how, and he explained to me, this is interesting, how does Iran lob more than a dozen missiles toward the space and not a single person is killed? Are they just lousy shots? Did these things not explode? What's really going on here? And I'm glad no one was killed, but come on, 12 missiles and no fatalities? And we heard the president say as much yesterday.
Well, what you have is that it's the type of missiles. They're ballistic.
Okay.
A ballistic missile, when we normally think of it, we're thinking the ICBMs from the 60s and 70s and 80s that were, they can go around the world in 30 minutes, are so destructive and hit these very precise places. Well, these are not guided missiles. Ballistic means you're only about the physics.
Okay.
So once you launch it, it's pretty much up to how well you angle it, what the force is of driving the missile and everything like that. So these are dumb missiles.
But still, you can aim somewhere and you could get lucky.
Okay. You could, and they did actually hit the bases. Okay. There was some damage from what I saw online. But there's a likelihood, in a very sophisticated way, that this was mainly diplomacy through military means. It looks like possibly the Iranians gave the Iraqis, who are nominally one of their allies, a heads up about this. Okay. They don't want to anger the Iraqis. They just want to
give them a heads
gesture.
Up. We're doing. And by the way, I don't want you to continue on that thought, but there's a before and after shot of the base we're talking about, and you can tell the image on the right is where it appears near one of the buildings there. There's a crater.
Sure.
There's a crater. So there was a hit, but you're thinking, and I would imagine there would have been people possibly in that building, that there was early warning, and so they said, hey, look, we're sending some off. Why don't you guys take the day off and go hide in a bunker somewhere?
It also could have been the idea that, well, we know this is the kind of thing that could happen, so let's just move our people out of there for the day.
Okay.
And as a precautionary measure.
And again, let's get into the diplomacy part of it, which I know you've got a good handle on. The reason being, we have the United States striking out and killing this general, and then as a result, the Iranians need to respond to show that they can't just be a pushover?
Sure. Well, Iran's government's legitimacy is largely based on their adherence to their version of Islam, because it's a religious theocracy kind of government. And also, part of that is their ability to, or their intention to put us as this main enemy that they are the guard of the Iranian people against. So like, okay, we're the big threat, the great Satan, as they've said for decades now. So the more that they can show that we are a threat, the more it protects them from having to reform their own government if there are any problems economically and things like that. So when Iran does this, they are striking back at us. We struck at them largely because, according to the Trump narrative, according to what the White House says, this is after several provocations over the last several years. Soleimani was the architect of Iranian foreign policy that was very much hitting a lot of our allies, support of groups in Lebanon that were hitting against Israel, fomenting problems in Syria that were, of course, causing all sorts of issues there, doing things in Yemen, which was hurting our ally Saudi Arabia, doing things in Iraq that were directly killing American soldiers. So all of that is really, Soleimani's been a figure in this for over 20 years.
All right, so it built up.
Yeah,
I'm guessing the president then had meetings with his, intelligence officers and others, and finally maybe even hearing that there's other planned activities they think Soleimani had in the works.
Yes.
He thought, well, let's see, is there a way we can get him out of the picture?
And this is something he's probably been a target for years. It's whether or not we are ready to go after him and then also have the necessary information and that kind of thing to make it a success, because you don't want to try to do something like this and not succeed at it.
Right.
So depending on how long we've been looking for it, this may not have been our first opportunity. It's much like what we had with the situation with Osama bin Laden. We had more than one opportunity going back to the 90s where we passed on the ability to actually get him before 9/11 even. And whatever reasons that were given for not doing something, we didn't.
Right.
And eventually we did get Osama bin Laden. The same thing with al-Baghdadi from Islamic State, and now we have the Soleimani situation.
I think then yesterday a lot of people were very eager to hear what the president was going to say in the aftermath of the retaliation. I would imagine you're going to tell me that the president and his staff anticipated that the Iranians would have to do something.
Sure.
Okay, so he knew this because, I think a lot of people were maybe a little fearful that this was going to escalate beyond this, and I think the president made it pretty clear last night that that was not the plan.
Right.
All right. I mean, he's kind of walks both sides of it. So it's hard to get a read on this president sometimes.
Sure.
He went out, he hammered them. They retaliated. It's helpful that no Americans were killed in the retaliation, and now it seems like
intentional.
Right. But he probably anticipated that there was. For all we know, he knew ahead of time they were going to hit these actual bases and when and how. And he said, "Okay, well,
I don't think he maybe knew it to that extent. They probably had an idea that
something
these are
was
the ones that are
happen.
the most vulnerable, because the Iraqis and the Americans know that border with Iran.
Okay.
I mean, we've been there for 20 years. We've been keeping an eye on that border for decades now. The Iraqis are very familiar with their own territory. So it's probably likely they were able to zero in and say, okay, that's the most likely place that the Iranians will do something.
Okay.
And, again, this has built up over years, but there's also been some very direct provocations over the last year or so. Shooting down one of our drones. And shooting down a drone is a big deal because that's a $100 million piece of...
That's expensive, drones are unmanned.
And it's a military asset that is very expensive. It's very... sophisticated. It's one that we find very valuable in terms of its ability to do things like killing.
Where was the drone, though? I mean, if the drone's flying over my country and I shoot it down, that's too bad for you.
I don't think it was. I think it was
I don't know where it was, but I'm just saying.
It was over part of Saudi Arabia, actually.
Okay.
Then there was the attack on the Saudi Arabian oil distribution center. Then there are the taking over various tankers in the Persian Gulf itself. So it wasn't always directly against the United States, but it was against what we might call the world order, if you will.
All right.
So and Iran has, over the years, they were largely responsible for a lot of the resistance against United States troops in the occupation of Iraq going back to the mid-2000s. And that means they are at least indirectly, if not directly, responsible for a lot of deaths of American soldiers.
All right, we'll go to a break. When we come back, we can take some calls. Your thoughts on how things are shaping up, 737-7587. I want your thoughts as well when we come back, Professor, just along the lines of, all right, you get Soleimani out of there, but as so often is the case, there's someone else ready to step into the slot.
Sure.
How big a change does this mean? Getting rid of him, does that mean all these problems go away, or is someone else just going to pick up the slack? We'll take a break. Be back with him and your calls right after this. Stay with us.